Hey spooksters, and welcome to Secondhand Horror, a show where we find interesting, unique horror books and read them to you like you're 5 years old. Guess what? It's the finale! Brr, 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 brr. I'm excited to find out what happens at the very end of this book. We're in for 2 last long chapters. Also, you might notice that I now have a flaming pumpkin. I'd like to give a shout out to my cousin and his wife for this lovely gift. His name is FP. But without further ado, let's get into the finale of Totentanz. So put on your comfies and strap in for a wild ride. Let's go. Chapter 19. He would be king of the dead. Pup Malmut let the sound of the phrase roll around his mind on velvet casters. King of the dead. It was a nice thought, a substantial thought, the kind that once he might have dreamed only at night but now could take out in the cold sun and look at without shrinking. How fast things could change. One day an ineffectual little fat boy taking orders from everyone, from his parents to his teachers to the 2 younger boys he hung out with. And the next day, king of the dead. Ash had said it in so many words, and Pup believed him. He had studied Ash, had seen how insubstantial he was and how there was something the Shadow Man was holding back on. Ash acted tough when he was around people who were afraid of him, but there was something, some secret thing that scared the boogeyman senseless. Pup had seen it in Ash's eyes when he'd taken care of that Civil War relic, Jeff Scott. A couple of Scott's comments had hit home. But what was it that frightened Ash so badly? Pup didn't know, but he was determined to find out. And when he did, well, he'd deal with Ash. The killing of Jack Gantry had not disturbed him as he thought it would. All he had to do was let the feelings he'd always kept down, deep down, come out in the open. The rest was easy. Jack had been his friend, but he had also been his better, so he thought. Stupid Marine. So Pup just thought of it that way and let the juices flow. After Jack were others Ash had let him in on. His math teacher, Mr. Groton, a guy named Fred Horder who'd once called him Fat Boy in the schoolyard, a couple of others. It had actually been easy for a while. Ash had told him to just remember the hate, and when he did, everything came naturally. After all, he was just getting even. Anyone would do that, given the chance. In regular life, he probably would never have had the chance to get back, and here it was on a silver platter. So why not? His parents, though, had not been so easy. Ash's eyes had sparkled when he told Pup he wanted to take care of his parents. And for the first time, Pup had hesitated. "What's wrong?" Ash cooed. Pup felt his perfect admiration for Ash slipping into something else. A momentary burn of pure anger rose in him. "I'll take care of you later," he thought. He answered, "Nothing's wrong," liking his own bravado. "They're by the House of Mirrors," Ash said evenly. "Make it quick." Pup put a smile on, but he couldn't help feeling as he was walking out that Ash knew. He knows I'm chicken. Once again, a flow of clean hatred coursed through him. He wanted more than anything in the world to hold Ash's thin neck between his hands, to crush the white face and pummel the smug grim away. Ash thought he knew it all, but if everything went as planned, he would soon be terrified of Pup Malmut. Ash could be handled, just like his father handled all those assholes who came to him at the bank for business loans. There was always a way to handle things. He made his way out onto the midway. Still, he felt Ash's eyes on him. He glanced back, expecting to see nothing but the closed gap of the tent. He was shocked to see Ash standing there in the opening, calmly watching him. That slight grin was on his face. He blew a smoke ring and waved faintly at Pup with his lit cigarette. "Just wait, bastard. Soon I'll shove that fucking thing down your throat till you choke on it." He turned, marching resolutely toward the House of Mirrors. His nerve failed again when he got there. Were they really inside? Maybe they weren't, and he wouldn't have to go through with it. How would Ash know? Even if he did, so what? He hesitated at the entrance, listening for sounds. Nothing. Maybe it was a trap. Ash wouldn't dare. He needed him. He had told him so. Anyway, he had promised. Pup, you'll be king of the dead. He entered the House of Mirrors. He kept his eyes on the floor, following the twists and turns of the labyrinth. He'd learned this trick long ago at a local carnival with Reggie. Once inside, he looked up and immediately felt a sense of dislocation. Staring at him were 6 young men with uncombed hair and set mouths. He hadn't looked at himself in a long time and was startled. He seemed older and leaner. There was a tautness around his eyes and face that hadn't been there before. He liked what he saw. King of the Dead. He dropped his gaze and followed the sawdust-covered maze of mirrors. His mind began to wander. He thought of what it would be like when he became the leader of everything. He would have all the food he wanted and no one to tell him what to eat or when. And there would be girls. Not like Lavinia Crawford. After Ash had presented him with the real Lavinia Crawford, he had quickly tired of her, and after the second time he discovered that with her it was not all he had dreamed it would be. She was, it turned out, as stupid as a cow, and after hearing Ash talking with him about what he would have in the future, she had demanded that she be part of it too. He'd been almost relieved when he got rid of her, though he had felt a bit of revulsion about it. After all, she had been the first girl he'd ever done it with, and well, he felt as she had taken a part of him with her. After that, he'd begun to think about other girls he'd known, and Ash had arranged for him to be with a couple of them. He decided then that it would be best to have many girls rather than just one. They each had something to offer, even the ones who fought. It would be best to have a lot to choose from, and if they didn't obey him, well, that's why they'd call him King of the Dead. Up ahead, there was a sound of breaking mirrors. 7 years bad luck, his mind said automatically. Then there came the sound of another breaking mirror and a shout. His mother? He couldn't be sure. He quickened his steps, suddenly rounded a corner and stepped onto broken glass shards. "Oh, Pup!" When his mother spoke his name, her voice had a tone of relief in it that had never been there before. She was disheveled. Her expensive gown was torn at the shoulder, her hair pushed out of place. It figured that she would have taken the time to put on her most elegant things before leaving for the amusement park. It was just like her to show up everybody else in town. There was a silk purse on the ground, covered with bits of broken mirror and powdery sawdust, its contents scattered. One of his mother's shoes was missing. Her eyeliner was smudged, making her look like a teary raccoon. A hate for her greater than he had ever known welled up within him. "Pup, I've been so alone in here. I can't find my way out." She limped toward him, whimpering. "Where's Father?" Pup asked. She waved in the opposite direction. Her voice was affected and breathy. He went on ahead. "I told the foolish man to stay with me, but you know he never listens." She held out her hand to him as if they were at a cocktail party. "Pup, get me out of here." Pup brushed past her to listen at the turn in the mirrored path. "How long ago did he leave you?" She bent down and began to retrieve her cosmetics, shoveling them back into her handbag. 10, 15 minutes? We've been in here so long." Pup saw only a dark, reflective twisting ahead. Behind him, his mother said, "Dreadful place. It just isn't what I thought it would be, and I doubt that it's good for Montvale. I came only because I thought I saw your grandmother, but of course it couldn't have been really her, and she led us into this mirror place and then abandoned us. I'll have to recommend that Mayor Poundridge close down this entire monstrosity." She stood up. In a few short moments she had managed to rearrange her hair and make herself presentable again. Even her eyeliner smears were gone. "Pup, take me out of here now," she said. A deep hesitation clutched Pup. He hated this woman with a deeper hate than he ever had, but she was his mother. "Pup, are you listening to me, An image was forming in the mirrors around Pup. Ash smiling knowingly at him, cigarette saluting limply in his hand as if to say, "I know you can't do it, boy. You don't have the stuff to be king of the dead." "Pup, do as I say this instant." There was her face, her huge face staring down at him, telling him what to do, and his tiny 2-year-old hands reached up to hit her away, and sudden fire came into her eyes, and her hand was momentarily on his neck before she slapped him for the first and last time. His mother's throat was in Pup's hands before he knew what he was doing. He knew he had to do it quickly or not at all. His tie to her was too strong, and even hate, when too strong, could turn into something else and immobilize him. And then there were Ash's eyes. He knew they were still in that mirror, taunting him. He knew that if he looked anywhere at the mirror or down at his mother's face, he would not be able to complete what he had started. Trying not to feel the weakening pulse between his tight fingers, he looked up at the ceiling of the house of mirrors. To his shock, there were mirrors up there too. The entire ceiling was silvered, throwing back reflections of the ground. He did not look at what was in his hands. He saw only himself, his own straining face. When he looked into his own eyes, he knew he would be all right. They were the eyes of someone he knew and trusted, the only person in the whole world he liked. King of the Dead. He left his mother in the sawdust, with the contents of her handbag once more scattered, the compact and lipsticks and eyeshadows that had been her masks against him. Up ahead, someone stumbled in the corridor, cursing loudly. Pup knew that everything would be all right now. His father appeared between two mirrors. The reflection in the twin silvered glasses turned him into triplets. He looked at Pup, and then down at his wife, lying on the ground. He used that same tight-eyed, weighing look he always used when measuring a situation. When he saw his wife, his eyes widened almost imperceptibly, but almost at once they regained their normal, dull luster. "Raymond," he said, using Pup's real first name. The word held many things at once. Command, you'd better respect me, and surprisingly, almost a hint of understanding. Pup said nothing as his father stepped fully into the room, leaving his mirrored twins behind. As disheveled as his mother had been, his father was still neat in appearance. He wore a tie with a small, sharp red knot at the top of his white collar. His late summer sports jacket was properly unwrinkled. Somehow, as always, he looked recently shaved. His full but firm face was set in his most businesslike way. Even his shoes, with all of the walking and scuffling about, looked newly shined, the black leather hardly creased behind the toe. A businessman? Always a businessman. "Something mighty strange going on here," his father said. This pronouncement seemed at once to include everything he meant. Strange amusement park, strange end for his wife, strange son standing before him. If he showed any surprise about any of it, he kept it all well hidden. "Quite strange," he said, moving closer to Pup and not taking his eyes off of him now. "Why don't you stop?" Pup asked. He tried to sound casual and was delighted to find that there was no nervous ring in his voice. It sounded very much like his father's voice. "I want you to listen to me carefully, Raymond," his father said, taking another step forward. "I said stop." His father stopped short. The very fact that he had done so seemed to surprise and frighten him. And for the first time in his life, Pup saw his father unsure of himself. His father looked in the mirrors at the multiple diamond-like reflections of the scene around them. "What do you want me to do?" his father asked. "Don't move. Don't move a step." He already knows who I am, Pup thought. He can sense it, taste it. He thinks he can make a deal with me. "Can we talk, Pup?" his father asked coolly. "You never wanted to talk before." Red anger flushed around his father's starched collar, but he kept his control. The man is marvelous. "I'm your father." Pup was silent. Pup could see the gears shift in his father's mind. How to handle this boy, he was thinking. What new tactic to try? What direction to come in from this time? It was like an electronic chess game Pup had. When it was like the computer's move, a little red light stayed on until it had finished working through the possibilities. The longer the tiny red light stayed on, the better you knew your own move had been, because it had meant the machine was stumped and trying to find a good move in a losing game. Pup thought, the machine is stumped. The little red light in his father's eyes went out, and he said, "You'll need help." Pup smiled. and the red light went on again almost immediately. He was wishing he had the move back, wanting to think some more because he knew he hadn't said the right thing. His father drove ahead, seeing nothing better to do, trying to twist things around his way as he went along. "You can't do it by yourself, pup. You're too young." He closed his mouth for a moment, a red flush again crawling over his collar, and took a heavy breath. "I've been at this game a long time. I can teach you everything I know." "I already know everything you know. I watched you." "There's more. Much more. It isn't all on the outside, you know. There are things you can't learn from watching. The rest I taught myself, just like you did." Before he could stop himself, his father said, "Do you hate me that much?" The very fact that he was saying something like this told him that he was losing the game. He nearly panicked. A new tint came over him, not of self-anger or reproach or frustration, but of fear. He was losing. "I can see where you would hate me," he went on. He tried to talk himself into some new advantage. He would talk forever given the chance, Pup knew. Plenty of times Pup had seen him take a man he had just cheated out of a big sum of money, and in the course of a few minutes, or maybe over lunch, make the man think he was in the presence of the best friend he had ever had. The money meant nothing. He would let Pup's father do it to him again for the pleasure of it, and often he did. Pup's father was an usherer of rare talents who enjoyed not so much the money he made as how he made it, the process of fucking over his clients. "I don't see why that hate you have for me can't be changed, Pup." A rage was building in Pup, and at the same time, he wanted to laugh. "You killed your own mother," his father blurted out. He pointed with a shaking finger at the sprawled corpse on the ground. "How could you do such a thing?" "You've been slowly killing her for years," Pup answered. "Not that she didn't deserve it. Do you think you were good to her?" "No," his father said desperately. "I wasn't good to her because I didn't love her. But she made us stay together. She made me stay with her because of you." The red light blinked on in his eyes again, instantly going off. He knew he had found a good move. Something struck at Pup, something way down inside the layers and layers. For a reeling second of time, he was not the king of the dead. He was something else. A tiny voice down there called him an imposter, a liar, a cheat. The voice started to grow. His father saw what was happening. He'd seen it many times before, and he dived into the tiny opening, threading the needle perfectly with his words. "However bad it was, she made a home for you, Pup. Even though she was rotten at them, she did all the things a mother is supposed to do, because she believed that was the way it was supposed to be. We even had an agreement that once you went away to college in a few years, we would get a divorce. But she wouldn't even talk about it until then. She loved you, Pup." The little voice in Pup began to shout horrible things at him. He looked at a mirror on the wall, a distorted, ceiling-to-floor mirror with a long crack down its middle. The crack tore right through his face and made it into two not quite halves. The halves didn't meet in the middle. That was the way his mind felt now, as though someone were breaking it into two jagged parts with a hammer. "You're not the king of the dead. You're a murderer." "Even if I didn't love you enough, Pup, she did." The two pieces of his head were grinding against one another, trying to jam themselves back together. Pup screamed, clutching at his hair, digging his fingers deep into his scalp. He stumbled toward the broken mirror, hitting it with his shoulder. The mirror shattered into thin, sharp bits, raining them down like tinkling bells. Pup fell to the sawdust and began to sob into his hands. "You killed her, Pup." His father dug in relentlessly, close by his ear. "No." "Yes, you did. You killed her with your own hands." Pup looked through his tears and saw on the ground before him, reflected in the bright shard of mirror, his father, standing above him with a knife-sharp silver of glass in his hand, bringing it down at him. Pup rolled over, rising to his knees. His father lunged at the spot where he had been. The makeshift blade shattered and he backed away. There was an animal glow in his eyes, feral bright points of instinct. "You bastard," Pup thought. "You used her dead like you used her alive." His father turned and ran off into the maze of mirrors. He pushed himself away from a large glass that broke as he hit it and ran on. Pup stood up calmly. His eyes caught the fallen form of his mother, now covered with speckles of mirror. There was nothing in his heart for her. She had deserved it. His father deserved it more. Even if what his father had said was true, it changed nothing. She was dead. It was too late to do anything for her, and his father was the real culprit. A small grin crept over Pup's face as he stepped over his mother's still body and into the maze. He heard his father's rough breathing up ahead and the occasional sound of breaking glass. Pup followed resolutely. He didn't need to follow the sawdust on the ground now. He could have walked this path with his eyes closed if he had to. He knew the way to go. In a dimly lit glass ahead of him, Ash's face appeared, smokily indistinct. The mouth opened and closed, the blood slit saying something to him. Pup moved past, unminding, though he did hear Ash's laughter. "I'm king of the dead," he thought. Nothing would stop him now. There was a shout, and then a strong intake of breath from ahead, and he heard another crash of flesh against glass. Soon there appeared the sawdust, a few drops of blood, and then one of his father's shoes. A pile of slivers came into view, revealing broken three-sided cusps of mirrors. Blood was splattered everywhere. Close by, he heard labored breath, and then, from around the corner, his father appeared. He was limping. One trouser leg was nearly torn off, held only by a few threads. When he saw Pup, he turned and hobbled away, holding his leg with both hands. "Stop," Pup commanded, and his father came to an abrupt halt. He fell in a heap, whimpering. "Please, son," he wheezed. "Please." Pup calmly approached. "Son?" he mocked. "Did you call me son?" "You never called me that before. Do you really want to admit after all this time that I am your son, fat and slow and seemingly stupid as I am?" "Yes, you're my son," his father wept. "You've always been my son." He held his trembling hands together. "I've always loved you." "Call me king of the dead." His father stared at him. All at once the old animal look crawled onto his features. Then some buried relay switch snapped on, and he changed his mind. "You're my son," he pleaded. "Call me king of the dead. Isn't it enough for you to be my son?" "You can do it," Ash's voice said to Pup from somewhere close by. "My 3rd birthday," Pup said. It was his 3rd birthday. It was the first birthday he remembered, and he was surrounded by presents. There was a rocking horse on springs, a huge, expensive thing of plastic and real mane hair, and a pile of other toys, books, a tricycle, a stuffed monkey, wind-up soldiers. 30 relatives and children from his preschool class were there. The cake was as big as Pup himself. He sat at the head of the dining room table, the place of honor, his father's place. "Where's Daddy?" he asked when his mother leaned over to cut the cake. His father was the only one in the universe not there. All afternoon he had wondered where his daddy was. Now he had been made to sit in his father's spot at the table, and he wanted to know where he was. "He had to go to work today, puppy," his mother said. Though her face kept its smile, something that was obvious to him then, even at that age, changed in her eyes. "But he sent you all these presents. He really wanted to be here, but he just had to work today." "I want Daddy here," Pup said petulantly, striking the edge of the table with his small fist. "He'll be home soon," she said, beginning to grow nervous. Pup knew she was lying, and he became even more hysterical. "I want Daddy." "Pup," his mother soothed. "I said he'll be home soon. Daddy, Daddy." Pup struck at the table with both hands. His mother, embarrassed, tried to lift him from his chair. He resisted, throwing out his fingers at her face. She stumbled back from him. He pushed the birthday cake aside and sank his fists into it. His face was red, and he was crying explosively. "Daddy!" He threw the cake from the table. It landed with a collapsing thud on the floor. One of his aunts got out of her chair and moved toward him. He screamed in rage and kicked at the fallen cake, sending soft pieces flying around the room. He ran into the living room where his presents were stacked neatly after the opening ceremony. He lifted them, one after another, over his head and hurled them as far as he could. Hands reached down at him. Then he looked up to his mother's horrified face and screamed at her. "Get away!" She pulled her hands back, and he threw himself at the horse his father had brought him, tearing at the mane with his hands, trying to pull it from its springs. He climbed onto it. The horse tilted ominously, but he didn't notice. He held on tight and kicked furiously, trying to break it. He pulled a great handful of hair from the mane. The hairs coming loose threw him off balance. He dug in with his shoes to the side of the horse, and his momentum threw the toy animal over sideways. He saw the ground looming up, heard the squeak of springs. The wooden floor rushed up at him, and then there was night, silence. Pup's hands were clenched into tight balls. At first he saw only mirrors and his own red-faced reflection in them. Then he saw another reflection, a mound of something on the floor in front of him. It was a shapeless red and fabric thing. At first his eyes would not focus on it, but gradually the haze cleared from his vision and he saw what it was. Even a horse couldn't do that, he thought, and instantly knew that a crazed horse could. Portions of what had once been a human were so beaten that a large horse's hoofmark was plainly visible, as if the animal had stepped into soft mud. Pup turned. For a moment he felt sharp, sour bile climbing his throat, but he steadied himself. He took a few long breaths, stood straight and willed himself to look back, and when he did, a small crest of nausea passed over him. But then he felt fine. He had the stomach for it now. He took another long breath and didn't look away. He wouldn't be squeamish again. For a moment, he thought Ash was standing before him, but he saw only his own cold eyes staring back at him in a mirror. Suddenly, thinking of how Ash had taunted him, he wanted Ash to be there. A flash of pure anger went through him, and his eyes lingered on the mirror, waiting for Ash to appear. "You'll get yours." Abruptly, there came a strange light, and fear bolted through him as the house of mirrors began to disintegrate. Fear turned to awe. Before his eyes, one world was being torn down and another erected. The walls around him vanished, turning into insubstantial beads of mist, leaving another place behind, a red world. He found himself in an open area with clouds high above and a black and crimson sky. There was a low wall of roughly blocked stones to his left. A circular stairway was cut into it, corkscrewing up and around. He walked to it and mounted the steps. Low thunderheads were crawling by above. Thick, evil puffs of fog moved beneath them, challenging their slow progress. The world seemed all blacks and reds and deep yellow browns. Did I do this? The thought coursed through him, but then he was filled with doubt. He hadn't willed anything like this to happen. Had Ash? No. He knew that Ash did not have that kind of power on his own. He was just a leech. He could only use hate and fear siphoned off from others. At least that's what Ash had told him. That's why he'd been drawn to Pup, he said, because Pup had enough hate to do all kinds of things. And that was where the idea of King of the Dead had come from. Why not? Ash had smiled. Why can't you do anything you want? Pup had known that Ash was greasing him up, stringing him along, giving him one of his father's best lone officer looks, level and cool. But the wheels in Pup's head had begun at the moment to turn smooth and tight. Let Ash jerk him around, then Pup would find out how he ticked and... You'll get yours, Ash. But if Pup hadn't willed this new setup into being, who had? Who had enough power or hate or fear to make this happen? Now, real fury rose in Pup to think that there was someone out there who would also steal Ash away from him. The idea was unbearable. This new adversary would have to be dealt with immediately, have to be overcome and torn to bits. There could be no negotiation, no draw-out inquiry. Pup wanted what he wanted, now. He trudged to the top of the tower and surveyed the countryside surrounding him. There was something about it. He knew this world. A moan, half gasp, half cry of wrath came out of him. He knew this world. Before him was laid out something so familiar and yet so alien that his mind could not at once comprehend it. A sweeping lowland stretched to the mist-shrouded horizon. To the north stood a dismal, black-watered bay with a foundering ship in its harbor. The same one I used for Jack. But that had been only a temporary hallucination, something he had pulled out of his memory as suitable. This world was much more detailed and complete. On land, there were only scenes of death, a sprawling panorama of marching skeletons and stumbling humans falling before their onslaught. Some of the bone men bore weapons, long blades or sickles or knives, thin and sharp. Some worked in gangs, closing in one on one or two people, then dragging them off to hang or behead or burn. The ground was stained in red spots. Grinning skeletons were by far in the majority. Possibly the ghoulish Montvale dead Ash had summoned to man Jeff Scott's amusement park. As Pup watched, fascinated, a huge phalanx of skeletons swarmed like ants out of a cave and fell upon a group of Montvale citizens. A dim chorus of screams arose as the two groups met head-on. Pup was mesmerized. This was more than he had ever imagined. The sheer amount of killing filled him with exhilaration. This was the kind of thing he would have liked to have come up with. For the briefest moment, he wondered again if he had somehow invented it all. But he knew this wasn't true. Someone else held the key to this carnage. Off to one side in the far distance, a lone figure appeared in a spot remarkably free of activity. At first, Pup could not make out who it was. Mist drifted in, and the form vanished into a world of sickly red smoke. But then the mist cleared, and Pup had his answer. And he knew what place this was. He thought of all the times he had stared at the same scene, now come to life before him as a poster on a wall in a bedroom, in a place called Montvale. That same figure stumbling toward him now had stood by that picture so many times, pointing out the minute details and explaining what it all meant, how this or that symbolized something or other, making it all seem real and scary and fun. The same figure had even carried a copy of that poster in his wallet so he could study it anywhere. So it's Reggie Carson. A wolf smile crept over Pup Malmut's face. Reggie, almost within hailing distance now, looked tired and worn and not at all indomitable. Maybe he didn't even know what he had done, what he was capable of doing. And then for some glorious reason, Jeff Scott's taunting words to Ash, the ones that had so enraged him, slipped into Pup's mind, and his smile became even wider. So this is who Ash is afraid of. It all fit so neatly that he laughed out loud. Ash was afraid of Reggie Carson and had been willing to give himself to Pup to have Reggie out of the way. You'll be king of the dead, Pup. Sure, and then after Pup had gotten rid of Reggie for him, Ash would turn on him. But what Ash didn't know was that Pup had his own plans and hadn't been fooled for a moment by that soothing voice, the limp, friendly grin. King of the dead, Pup. Well, if Ash was afraid of Reggie and wanted someone to help do away with him, fine. And then, once that someone had found out the secret to Reggie's power over Ash and delivered him on a silver platter to the Shadow Man, you'll get yours, Ash. Reggie was just below the tower. Pup stood up. Hey, he shouted, waving his arms and putting as much feeling as he could into his voice. Reggie, it's me, he wanted to add. It's me, King of the Dead. But that could wait. The genuine gladness that had spread over Reggie's face upon seeing Pup would do more than well enough for now. You won't smile for long, musketeer. Pup nearly raced down the stone steps, trying to keep his heart from leaping with joy. He wanted to crush Reggie with happiness, lift him off the ground and kiss him. Reggie had made it all possible. The hate went off to one side for a moment. There was such a genuine feeling on his features that Reggie would take it for granted that this was the reunion of two lost friends. Even as he flew down the remaining steps, Pup's mind was constructing appropriate ways to resolve things. How to handle Reggie? There were probably 100, 1,000 good ways. They vied in Pup's mind for attention, and he tried to give them all the loving care they required. Above all other thoughts, only one hung like a huge, joyful black cloud. One thought alone minimized even the wonderful expectation he felt in the coming extermination of his final problem. It really would come true. He knew finally that his actions up to now had not been in vain, had not been merely the venting of some demented adolescent spleen on those closest to him. I really will be King of the Dead. Hoo-wee. So they're in a painting, they're in hell. Hell is actually a painting? I'm so confused. Pup seems to be too good for himself, and I know that this will probably be his downfall, although I would be pretty surprised if he and Reggie got back together and somehow Pup had a redeeming quality about him. But now that they're in this big red, black, yellowish, brown space together, and now time to face off against Ash, I'm curious as to how it's all going to go down because we don't have many pages left. So I guess let's conclude Totentanz. Chapter 20. At the moment Reggie Carson faced Pup Malmut's wild, grinning beast's face, he knew how it would happen. Somehow the knowledge calmed him, as if an insistent but relatively trivial question had been answered. Pup clasped him like a brother, and on the outside at least, he seemed the same friend Reggie had known for years and years, and yet there was something essentially that had changed in him. He was gaunt inside his flesh, a thin canine thing in a fleshy body. Pup belonged in this world of red flame and black earth, was feeding off of it like a fly might feed off of a piece of fetid meat. Reggie knew it, despite the fact that this was the same Pup Malmut he had known for so long. This side of his friend had been there all along, perhaps had owned him all along, and now, under all this sulphurous air and crimson atmosphere, he was illuminated. Reggie thought of the little things Pup had done, the burning of ants with scalding water, the torture of a frog or a turtle, the anonymous letter he had once sent to the parents of a girl in one of their classes, saying that she was sleeping with one of her teachers, all because the girl had turned him down when he asked her to a school dance. These little facets of the flawed and broken gem that was Pup Malmut were brought into cracked light now, and all of the sides of Pup Malmut showed the same black face toward the sun. Pup was evasive when Reggie asked about Jack. "He's here somewhere," he said. His eyes glowed like nocturnal lamps. When Reggie asked about Pup's mother, Pup was more affirmative. "I know where she is," he said. He was more wolf now than man, crouching and voracious, like one of those monsters the Three Musketeers had conjured up to scare themselves within the graveyard. Pup pointed to a spot in the distance. "I saw your mom over this way," he said. They moved over red earth. Reggie knew the ground they were walking over as if it was imprinted, map-like, in his head. They heard eerie sounds. With each shriek in the distance, Pup became more wolf-like, his features a grinning caricature, his body bony and repellent. He was feeding off of the very air. There was no before or after in Pup Malmut, only the moment of death itself. He was a beast, a creature possessed by the act of death, caught in the amber stillness of it. Reggie remembered all the Three Musketeer meetings they had had, remembered the light in Pup Malmut's eyes when they told ghost stories or tried to scare each other in the dark. While Jack had only thrilled like a child to it, and Reggie had sought something beyond it, Pup had been drinking the moment of pain itself and wanting more. There had been no thrill, no wonder for Pup Malmut, only the wish for hurt, the desire for death. Reggie now realized that Pup had attained his most secret wish. "Not much farther," Pup said when he turned to Reggie. His face was suffused with an almost angelic evil. Perhaps this was what Lucifer had looked like before his expulsion. Reggie had often dwelled on what evil must be like in its pure form, and now its essence was distilled in the face looking back at him. "What's wrong?" Pup hissed. With all of its new awfulness, it was still Pup Malmet's face. "Is anything wrong?" Pup's smile returned layer upon layer until he was grinning again. They crested a small rise. The mist rolled back before them like blown smoke. Pup pointed to an incongruous sight, a frayed carnival tent blown by a rusty wind, still intact in the midst of the hell around it. There. As he said this, a figure appeared in the opening, pulling a shredded canvas flap aside to stand and look up placidly at them. Reggie knew who it was. The figure did something with its hands, and a thin plume of black smoke drifted up from its face. Pup waved, but the figure made no reply, only standing still a moment and then suddenly turning back into the tent. Pup shouted, "Come on!" and then he was loping down the hill toward the tent, Reggie following calmly behind. Pup pulled the tent flap aside and went in. When Reggie reached it, he hesitated. For the first time since the eyes had appeared to him, doubt entered his mind. It was as though he had entered another realm, one governed by different powers, and he was not so sure of himself now. A corner of his mind was sprouting another seed, tiny compared to the one eyes had planted and grown, but one that had been there all along and had now flowered. It was the dark man's flower, and once again he had fear. He knew what awaited him in the tent, and he feared it. Panic seized him. He turned wildly, a caught-haunted animal, and saw only haze and red smoke around him. He was doomed, and there was nowhere to turn. Outside, death awaited him. Even the lone valiant soldier in Bruehl's painting he knew would fall to the remorseless grim blade of the white-bone demons. And inside that tent, the same sure fate would befall him. He was surrounded by it. And then another, more horrible thought flowered in that tiny corner of his brain. Maybe there was no tunnel of light. Maybe there were no warming eyes. Maybe there was nothing. Maybe there was only death, a thing with teeth and claws that ripped and sucked at your flesh forever. His hands were shaking, and there was a knot in his stomach that grew to fist size and began to twist within him. He wanted to get out. There was not enough air. There would never be enough cool air, and he had to go somewhere else. The tent flap drew aside slowly, and he screamed, expecting to see a horrid white face there, the face of it. But it was only Pup. The same Pup Malmet he had always known, his face flushed, eager and obedient. "He wants you," Pup said, and he put a hand that felt like a tight metal clamp on Reggie's arm. "Let me go," Reggie gasped. Pup's smile grew. "Sorry," he said, and then he placed both hands on Reggie's shoulders and squeezed. A bolt of pain went through Reggie from his shoulders down through his abdomen and thighs, as though hot lava had been injected into him. Suddenly, Reggie was sure that there was no way out for him. He had lost control of himself. The elaborate games he had played all had been for nothing. The lighted tunnel, the eyes, they had been only a dream, something he had built his whole false life on. He thought of begging, but knew by the look in Pup's hungry eyes that pleading would do no good. He went limp, and Pup laughed, hoisting him up and dragging him through the tent's opening. Reggie tensed and threw all his weight upward into Pup's middle. The blow caught Pup by surprise, and momentarily he lost his hold. Reggie fell and began to scramble to his feet. Pup leaned onto his back, throwing him to the dust, and suddenly there was a great weight in Reggie's chest, and he could not breathe. He turned over, looking up into Pup's eyes and seeing there was a light brighter than he had ever seen. "I'm going to kill you," Pup gloated into his face, his hands like pincers around Reggie's neck. "I'm going to pull your body to pieces with my bare hands." Pup's face seemed to have grown, and his body appeared monstrous, the body of a beastly giant. He raised one hand up over Reggie's face and brought it down hard, and there was a numbing pain, and Reggie could see nothing. Then a blurry vision returned to one eye, and he saw Pup's fist raised again, swinging down in a terrible arc. "Don't!" The voice came from behind Pup, and it was almost quiet. Pup hesitated, looking behind him. but then he shouted something hard and turned back to Reggie. His fist rose up, and again he brought it downward. "Stop!" Pup again stopped. His rage became huge, and he threw himself off Reggie in a quick motion, turning to face the voice. Reggie could not hear what was happening, but the ringing in his ears quieted, and he pulled himself up. Ash and Pup were face to face. "Calm down," Ash said placidly, and Pup screamed at him. "I want to do it now." "When I say so," Ash responded, his voice growing impatient. "I want to talk with him." "I said now," Pup shot back. He seemed to tower over Ash, his face filled with rage. For a moment there seemed to be an impasse, but then Ash reached out, touched Pup lightly with his finger, and said in the same quiet tone he had begun the conversation with, "I said wait." Pup grabbed at his chest where Ash had touched him and dropped to the floor. He tried to gasp but could not. His lungs were frozen solid. He could not even fight for breath. His face went from red anger to a desperate grimace as he fought for air. Ash glanced down at him, and suddenly he could breathe again. He gulped for air for a time before turning to face Ash. "You can't do that," he said, and there was a surprise as well as fury in his tone. "No one can do that to me." He pointed at Reggie. "He's the one you're afraid of, and you know it. I was going to kill him for you." He pulled another long draft of oxygen into his warming lungs. Ash ignored Reggie, looking down complacently at Pup. "And then? You told me we could work together." "Yes," Ash said, "but I never said how long it would last, and I don't really think that's what you had in mind. Did you really think you were going to be king of the dead?" He pronounced the last 4 words in a mocking sarcasm. Pup's anger began to rise again. "I told you no one," he started, but his chest tightened again, and then it was ice and he fell, clawing at his shirt, trying to bring some warmth to his frozen lungs. "The ego never ceases to amaze me," Ash lectured Pup sedatedly. "Did you really think you were anything more than an experiment? You had great hate, but in the end, it is Francis who has given me everything I need, which has made you nothing but an amusement. You really imagined that the fact that you were still alive around me pointed to some great power within you?" He laughed. Ash turned slowly toward Reggie. Reggie found that he could not look directly into the Shadow Man's face, and that Ash would not look directly into his. Suddenly, there was a definite note of wariness in Ash's voice. "I am going to kill your friend, Pup," he said, "and very slowly, because I want you to see what physical death is. You needn't feel sorry for him because," he looked down at Pup's tortured face, "he's been a very bad boy." Reggie felt Ash's aura over him lessen. It was as if those tiny flowers of the Dark Man's had flourished and died, and Reggie's mind was clear again. "Why don't you let him go?" Reggie asked quietly. Ash hesitated before answering. "That would be foolish." "I want you to let him go." "That can't be done." Ash sounded almost unsure of himself. Reggie bent down to help Pup to his feet. Pup clutched at him, trying to find air. Reggie turned his face to Ash. "Take me instead. I'll have you both." "Will you?" "Yes." Ash had banished his uncertainty, and Reggie was thrown away from Pup's body. With an artificial sound, air rushed into Pup's lungs, and then was pulled out again, giving him an instantly withdrawn respite. Ash stood over him. Pup looked imploringly at Reggie, and Reggie suddenly saw, in the startled, terrified face of the boy that Pup had been, so different from the creature he had become. "Watch," Ash instructed Reggie, and then a low, humming wail started deep in Pup's throat and built to a piercing whine. His hand started convulsively over his body, slapping everywhere as if 1,000 bees were stinging him. With infinite, tearing slowness, portions of Pup's flesh began to rip themselves from his body. "You've heard of a pound of flesh?" Ash placidly asked Reggie. "I'll give you 150 pounds of it. This will take quite some time, so I suggest you find a chair." Stop, Reggie said, looking at the red flaking thing that was Pup Malmut thrashing and screaming on the ground. Pup's eyes were fixed on Reggie's, wild with pain and terror. The flesh slowly ripped away from around Pup's eyeballs, leaving two round, staring monstrosities in his disintegrated face. Ash, stop! I don't want to, he spoke happily, and his face was tinted a flushed pink. He moved a step closer to Pup, pushing at him with the toe of one shoe, which only made Pup scream louder. You do see the point I'm making, don't you? He's dying, and he knows it. The slowness of the act makes him realize it all the more acutely. He leaned over Pup's face. You do know you're dying, don't you, King of the Dead? What you're experiencing now is that thing you were so in love with. But for you, there will be no more giving of that kind of love. In fact, you'll be nothing in a matter of minutes. You're literally disappearing cell by cell before our very eyes. You know that, don't you? Pup's staring, horror-filled eyes gave answer. He knows it. Ash continued, addressing Reggie, and you know it too. That's the point. Death is a horrible thing. You seem to have gotten the strange notion into your head that it doesn't mean anything, and that's completely wrong. What your former friend is going through is death itself, a dissemination and uncoupling of Pup Malmut from himself. In a few moments there will be no more Pup Malmut. Pup Malmut will be dead. In the past there will have been two Pup Malmuts, one who lived up to the moment of death, and the Pup Malmut at the moment of death. The second one is the one I own. I own that moment. That's what all the poor fools you saw risen from their Montvale graves were. Merely the good citizens of Montvale at the moment of their deaths. I own that moment. The rest of them, the good citizens who lived, no longer exist. They are gone. And I suppose that's a shame, eh? He looked over at Pup now, a nearly skeletal figure trembling as ever more flesh flaked away from his body. A shame, eh, Pup? No more living Pup Malmut. Not ever. He's made his rounds, and now he's out of the picture. Just like your parents, Pup. They're no more either. No more Mr. and Mrs. Malmut ever. Did you think of that while you were murdering them? Did you think about poor little Lavinia Crawford while you strangled her? How her pink little breasts will never blossom under your fingers or anyone else's ever again? There was only one girl in all of time with her breasts, and she's gone now. You killed her. No one ever again or before with exactly her body, her eyes, her lips, her sly, stupid smile. Did you think about any of that, Pup? Say yes, and I might save you yet. Pup's ruined, disappearing face nodded wildly. Sorry, Pup, it's too late. A keening wail escaped the carcass on the floor of the tent. Ash laughed, the sound building from a croak to a dry cough to a full roar. The wailing sound continued incessantly, even over Ash's laughter, and then suddenly Ash turned to Reggie, continuing to laugh, but dropping his tone to a lower register. Do you want to see the exact moment when Pup Malmut becomes mine? Would that make you happy? His laughter stopped, and he said harshly, You think you went through this when that milk truck hit your bicycle, but you didn't. You saw only the very beginning, and I'll make sure your despair is longer and harder than this foolish boy's ever could be. You're a special case for me, and I'm going to enjoy you. He moved closer to Reggie, grabbing him by the hair and dragging him over to Pup's body. Holding him by the back of the neck, he thrust his face down toward Pup. Look closely, boy, he hissed, his sickle mouth close, as wet as a snake's, to Reggie's ear. More than this will be yours. Pup Malmut, the skin all but shorn from his face, bare patches of smooth white skull showing beneath his flesh, thrust himself up horribly on his elbows and tried to reach out to Reggie. I don't want to die, he gasped. His eyes were huge in their white sockets, his raw hands, as the body fell back, reaching convulsively for Reggie. Don't let me die, please. Reggie tried to turn away, but Ash's grip held him firmly. He closed his eyes, and then Pup's hands, finding hidden, desperate strength, were upon him, pulling him down. Please. Reggie opened his eyes to see Pup's ruined and torn visage mere inches from his own face. It pulsated with escaping warmth, and Pup clasped Reggie tight around the neck. "God, please," Pup said, and then his tongue lashed out of his mouth and his teeth bared, and he tried to bite Reggie. Reggie threw himself away from Ash's reaching, gasped, and fell to one side. Pup began to scream again. Laughing, Ash said, "Don't let anyone tell you I don't have compassion." And then Reggie heard a horrified screeching wail, and when he looked up at Pup, there was only a mass of white and red bits. "There," Ash said, his face flushed dark, the word coming out of him like a tiny gasp. He stood regarding the remains of what had been Pup Malmet, staring at them as if he remembered warmly what had just occurred, and then finally spoke to Reggie. "I hope you enjoyed what you saw." Reggie looked at him in simple awe, as though he had just discovered Ash's secret. "You own only one moment," he said. Ash regarded him mildly. His skin had resumed its normal pasty color. His pitted eyes gave way the interest with which he was following Reggie's words. "That's all you are," Reggie went on. "You're only that one brief second when life leaves the body, nothing more." His words were a revelation to himself. "That's the only power you have." Still maintaining his placid demeanor, Ash's voice betrayed the anger he held. "Is that what you think?" He took time to draw one of his cigarettes out and light it. "Have you thought about what it would be like without Reggie Carson? What will happen when you are no more?" His voice was rising in angry degrees. "Have you thought about what it will be like for Reggie Carson when he falls over that ledge? When that one tiny moment comes?" Darkness assaulted Reggie, and coldness. He was in his own body, and he saw the world began to fall away. He saw the tunnel, up there above him, but he had fallen away from that too. He must have fallen into a hole. It was cold and damp. And then he felt moist earth around him, smelled putrefaction, felt tiny things crawling all over him and into him, and when he moved his hands over his body, he felt his body give way, cold parts of his flesh sliding loose from his bones and dropping into his hands, the bones themselves softening, rotting. He was Reggie Carson, and he was decomposing, being eaten away. He was Reggie Carson, and he was rotting away. His mind was in turmoil. Once again, he was before Ash, and he wanted to lie in the dust where he was, to curl up like a baby and not move. Ash was right. There was nothing in him that told him Ash was lying. Reggie Carson would be no more. No matter what the warming eyes had said to him, no matter how they had filled him with the courage and the will to do what he had to do, he knew now that this was the truth. He, Reggie, would be dead. Ash was laughing. Whatever caution and doubt he had possessed about Reggie was gone. "I knew there was nothing special here," he taunted. "I don't know why I ever thought there was. Do you know," he continued, his tone growing malicious and proud, "that you bothered me? I've been among the slime on this earth long before your conception was even a dream. I've been here since the first stupid, crawling, filth-ridden human crawled on all fours to hit his brother with a rock from behind. While the first cells divided after being struck by lightning, I was there, watching while one of them broke and died, turning back into dead water. And I left. I've always been here, waiting to drink and feed from this empty, senseless thing you call life. I've enjoyed every minute of it." He spoke with disgust. "And to think that you bothered me." He turned away, and then Reggie heard his name called, but not by Ash. He looked up sleepily from the dust, pushed himself onto his hands and knees. He saw Ash grinning at first, then from behind Ash he heard the voice, a pleading, "Reggie." That was weak and hopeful and full of despair. He stood up shakily, brushing the dust from his body. Rips in the tent canvas showed the bright world outside. Ash stepped aside. Crazy Frances was standing there, and behind her there were 3 other persons whom Reggie could not make out. He felt very tired. He heard his name called again, and then Crazy Frances stepped to one side, revealing the other figure was his mother. She was kneeling, and Crazy Frances rested her hand on her shoulder. His mother looked confused and tired. She stared at Reggie as if she hadn't believed he was really there. "Reggie?" "I'm all right, Mom." She tried to rise but could not. Either Francis's hand was holding her down or she didn't have the strength to get up. Ash again lit one of his black cigarettes. "As you can see, that nasty business with the horses on the carousel hadn't happened," he commented. "Don't hurt her," Reggie said. "Can I do otherwise? Do I want to do otherwise?" Ash took a long pull on his cigarette and then quickly tossed it aside. It smoked lazily, giving off black puffs from the floor. "Francis," he said softly, cajolingly. Francis stepped forward, taking her hand from Reggie's mother's shoulders. "Francis," Ash said. "Kill the woman." Francis turned to Reggie's mother, and Ash began to laugh, low and building. "Francis," a voice called from above, and Francis looked up. Reggie saw that the eyes were there, as huge as dishes, as if they contained the whole world. "Francis," the eyes said gently, "he who sent me is the resurrection and the life. If you believe in him, though you were dead, yet shall you live, and whosoever believeth in him shall never die. He who saves," Francis sobbed, though no tears formed in her eyes. "The North Star. Ash lied to me." She was telling this to herself, and a great cry broke from her. "He who saves was your veil," the voice said, "and he is with you now. Ash owns you no longer. Go and mix your dust with the sands of the earth." Francis's cry of despair changed to another kind of cry, and a great weight was drawn from her mind. A leaded veil lifted. She held her hands out, and then her body turned instantly to dust that was borne away on soft, scattering winds. "I told you I was with you," the eyes said to Reggie. A door opened in Reggie's mind, flooding him with light, and he saw what he must do. He knew now that there had never been any other way. The fear that had possessed him had vanished. He wondered why it had ever existed. When he looked up, the eyes were gone because they were within him now, and he heard Ash's scream of rage and saw Ash's face looming over him. "Kiss me," Reggie said, and he put his mouth on Ash's mouth. Ash's eyes widened in surprise, and the word "no" tried to make its way to his voice. Reggie held tight. He reached into the Shadow Man's coat to grasp his body to him, but his hands went into nothingness. There was a terrible black, cold weight upon him, but Reggie could not let go. Then Ash's mouth began to grow. Reggie felt it moving away from his own mouth on all sides, the thin, burning lips stretching outward. Ash was hissing with rage, and when Reggie opened his eyes, he saw that Ash's face filled his whole vision. The head had pulled back away from him. It was indistinct, and now behind it, Reggie could barely make out the side of the tent in the sky and beyond. The tent was falling to pieces, and the sky was not red now. It was blue. Ash opened his mouth to shout something, but only a low, pain-filled hiss escaped. When he grabbed for Reggie, his hands would not reach. They had become the hands they had always been beneath the skin, long, brittle, skeletal bones, and Ash's head was now the hollow, clacking skull bone that had been hidden just beyond sight. The mouth was wide, the eye holes burning with black emptiness. Ash hissed again, a long, sibilant sound, and then everything behind Ash was lost to view, and Ash himself was gone in a burn of screaming, sharp light. A dark, silent envelope enclosed Reggie like a womb. He floated fetus-like in it until it pulled out ahead and behind him, and he was in the tunnel. For a moment, he was in darkness, and then suddenly before him, as if the lamp of creation itself had gone on, a bright light arose, and the two eyes were there before him, bathing him in their radiance. They were his own eyes. "Hello." The eyes were surrounded by the dim outlines of a body. At a close distance, it resembled an animal, a hare or a lamb, but then Reggie saw that it was not an animal at all, but something that looked like a human, something that looked like himself. Reggie drew closer, and he saw that the figure's tiny, almost formless arms were spread wide, as if to embrace him. "I died the day that truck hit me," Reggie said. "Yes," the figure himself said, "but you were sent back. Every man is really three men, the man during life, the man at the moment of death, and the man after death. Ash owned the man at the moment of death, but even that which he was able to take advantage of in the weak was only an illusion because there is only one spirit. You, me. Look. Reggie looked and saw that a part of him was not with him anymore. There was a slight sweet tug, and he saw the body that had been Reggie Carson falling down and away from him to rest in some other place. He no longer felt that he was that of the body, and at that same time he felt as if he had lost nothing of himself. That is what he owned. That was his domain. Though it will mean nothing to you now, I will tell you that your town of Montvale has been restored and that your mother is safe. The others, Jeff Scott among them, now rest. A tone close to amusement came to the soft voice. They will put our body, the man who we were, in the tomb you always visited, the tomb of the unknown man. Who sent me back? Reggie asked. His own altered self smiled. This is what you will see. The form held out its arms and drew Reggie to itself. He folded gently into it. The form's arms held him like a mother might hold a baby. Reggie closed his eyes and found that he did not want to open them. There was no reason to. He had new eyes now. He gently wrapped his arms around himself and rocked himself, and then he slept until it was time for him to open his eyes once more. Well, that was Totentanz. I gotta be kind of honest, I'm a little bit disappointed at the ending. I'm still going, huh? I get it that Reggie conquered death and he was brought back, and so Ash, out of all the people, he had no control over Reggie because Reggie was basically immune to what Ash was doing. But it still doesn't make sense why it was Reggie who was brought back. Was it because that he was tied to Lucius, who was tied to Jeff Scott, who kind of cursed the town of Montvale? I'm guessing it would have to be that, but I'm still a little disappointed. The writing was a little rough in this book, but I was extremely drawn to the character of Ash and this whole thing in my head. I could picture it, and I'd love to see it brought out on screen in some kind of movie. Hopefully, fingers crossed, maybe someone will. If I had to give Totentanz a rating, I'd give it a rating of 3.5 flaming pumpkins out of a possible 5 flaming pumpkins, which is a real rating system. Ain't that right, FP? I would highly recommend this to anyone else if you have someone that you want to gift a book, or maybe you want to just read it again for yourself. Pick up Totentanz if you could find it. Well, that is the end of our book. It's been a long, sweet, interesting, kind of confusing ride, but I've had fun, and we hope you have too. Until next time on Secondhand Horror, thanks for listening or watching, Spooksters, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.